Hi everyone, I'm Mario, I am from Spain, from Galicia, and despite I'm in an association called Dinero Positivo, which is very similar to Positive Money UK or the International Movement for the Monetary Reform, in this video I will explain my own ideas about the problems regarding the implementation of digital cash, the CBDCs or central bank digital currencies, which are trending nowadays because many central banks in the world are thinking about issuing them and putting them in circulation. But this topic is not only a little bit difficult for everyday people, but it's also full of details that are of enormous importance regarding the consequences of implementing such devices. So in this video, what I will try to do is to be very simple, very kind with the mainstream viewer in order to get a first grip of the interest things going on in this sense. So first of all, let's talk about digital cash first, because many of you may not be aware of this idea. As you know, today the state or the central banks are the ones that create the physical cash, the coins and bills that we use every day. But most of the money is digital already. We all use credit cards or bank transfers. The kind of money that is being used in that is not the same as digital cash. The most part of the monetary mass that is around is bank money, which is a kind of digital money created by the private banks when they make loans. So all the money that you have in your bank account is money that somebody owes to somebody else somewhere. All this money is being created by debt. So it's a different kind of money. It's not just the same as the state money. And this is the question, because this private money, this private bank money, has a lot of problems. And the states are starting to realize some of them, and they want to provide like a digital version of the cash that we have today, which is a money that is not created by debt, but is simply issued fiat. No? So this is important. We have this trend of creating digital cash to have an upgrade on the cash that is a public money, public created money, free of debt, to the 21st century that we are in. So why do all central banks suddenly want to implement such kind of money? Well, the real reasons that push them to these ideas are not the ones that we wish they were. First of all, there are companies, private companies like Facebook or Google, that are playing around with the idea of creating their own money, the stable coins, they are called like that. And this is a serious threat that the monetary authorities of the world have realized, because these companies might not have the common interest in as a first priority when creating something that can be hegemonious in the society, that can become the money most used by the people. And this has critical importance. As the monetary institutions know, we have already a kind of fragile system, a kind of monetary system that has a lot of problems, because the most part of the monetary mass is created by the banks. And so if private companies now start to create money backed by the bank money, we're putting more and more layers of instability on top of the previous ones. So they realize that they have to compete with these ideas of creating another kind of private money, which would be the stable coins, by issuing maybe a digital cash system. Also, there is competition among central banks and among countries on being the first ones implementing these things, because they have maybe they truly have a lot of power to become very widely used, and it makes, for example, the power to create money, it is very profitable, and it comes back to the hands of the public institution. So there is a lot of reasons, but what I will talk in this presentation is that many of the most important reasons are not being seriously considered when talking about digital cash or CBDCs. And this is what I want to tackle with you in the next slides. So let's talk about what can go wrong. And for me, the most important thing that can go wrong by implementing a digital cash or digital money, state money, would be this critical failure, keeping bank money around. At first, it of course will be progressive with the amount of state money, state digital money, let's say digital cash, will be increasing little by little. But we can have the temptation to stop at some point and leave still a great part of the money supply to be bank money and deposits. This means that we forget about the problems of instability inherent to the bank money creation process. When banks make loans, they create new money. If they create loans for asset purchases like financial assets or housing assets, they create money and pump new money into these markets, which increases the prices of the things. That is, that they create bubbles in these markets. This is very profitable, and it's the basis of the profits that many of the big banks earn. So they create bubbles, and when the bubbles burst, they are very fragile because they have very small kind of reserves. They have a little bit of cash comparing to a big amount of deposits that they have to somehow I don't know, serve. No, if you want to take your money out of the bank, they have to have the cash, and if too much people want to get it out, pues, it's impossible. So they become very easily bankrupt. And as we don't have another kind of digital money, and the economy nowadays cannot function only by cash, the state is kind of imposed to rescue them, because we cannot accept that money disappears, all the money that people had in the bank disappears, and then becomes evident that it was fragile, and that we run out of money. That stops the economy. That's a big crisis. So the least bad option is to rescue them, despite they were the real ones that created the crisis in the first place. So this is a big problem nowadays. This problem with the banks. So if we let them still being the ones that create most of the money, or a big chunk, this creates a systemic risk. This creates the necessity for very much complicated schemes of protection to the banking sector. On top of that, regulation. If we are going to rescue you, we want you to work like this, like this, like that. It stops competition. It makes big banks even bigger, and it's a bad idea. So what will be the solution? In this sense, the solution is to realize that the creation of money should be, again, a public matter, and we shouldn't allow private actors to create the money of the state. They can create another kinds of money full of risk, but then they cannot create a money that is easily regarded by the society as the state money, because then we have to make sure that it is a safe money, and it is not. So that creates the problems that we see when we rescue the banks, and we do the quantitative easing and so much schemes, other kinds of schemes that aim to solve a fragile system in this sense. So the solution would be to transition more and more to a system where the banks just lend what they have, and if any kind of private actor wants to create money, they can, but it will not be confused with state money. So in order to achieve this, we have to reduce regulations and protections on the private banks, make everybody aware of the risks of their money, and do a kind of divorce and separation between the state money and all the private bank money. And we'll talk about this later in the fifth thing that can go wrong. So let's go to the next one. The next thing that we can do very wrong in this process of creating digital cash is to still have this idea of a central bank being the monetary authority that creates this currency. Because central bank means an institution that has to be an asset side and a liability side, that has to lend to other participants, that has to purchase things in the markets. This will not be needed anymore. It's needed nowadays because it aims to protect this fragile system that we have today. But if we centralize the creation of money into a public body that only has this function of controlling the amount of money in circulation, and that's it, it loses all the bank functions. It only has to put money into circulation, into the accounts of the state or of the citizens, and keep track of the transactions. It would do this not directly, but by all kind of intermediation of every kind of company that wants to do this job. We would make it easy for any kind of enterprise or company to provide financial services or payment services, today, as banks do today. In order to decentralize this system of banking services or payment services. We only have to have an institution that is like a register of the monetary property of every kind of participant of the market of the society. So in this sense, the seigniorage, which is the profit made out of creating the money, would again be for the people and for the state, and not kept controlled by an institution like nowadays the central banks do in many cases. So it is a wise thing to not allowed for the central bank to keep as big as it is, and with all the functions that are very controversial as they are today. And talking about solutions in this sense, the central bank, or the monetary authority, which will be like a fourth power in the division of powers of the state, would have two main tools, very direct and very useful for keeping the inflation target, and for ensuring that the market provides enough financiation for the economy. These two measures would be the next ones. First, it can regulate the amount of money that it puts into circulation, and it would do 50-50, 50 for the government budget and 50 for every citizen in a territory. And it would have a tax, a special tax, in order to take out money from circulation if the inflation goes very wild. It's a tax that is not for the government budget, but it's just to take out money from circulation if needed. Okay, if we aim for zero inflation or 1 or whatever. And the second tool that it would have is to put money into circulation in order to be lent out for private actors in the economy. A similar way that as the money that banks create today, but in this sense it's a little bit different. It only would put money into circulation when the interest rate is too high, so it would cap the interest rate, for example, at 5%. If we don't want more than 5% interest rate, then the monetary authority can put money into circulation just to be lent out in order to keep this interest rate controlled. Also, something that is very important is to align the objectives of the states that the Central Monetary Authority represents with their with these tools. What I mean is that if you put money to be lent out, you can put criteria to lend this money out. For example, if we are trying to fight climate change, to put a condition in order to access to this newly created money in order to be lent out. All private participants on the market that want to have this money to lend it out have to apply and accomplish this criteria. So that would be a thing that I think it would be very, very useful. Now it's a controversial thing, but I want to talk about the relation of this monetary authority and the government itself. And despite I agree that it is part of the government, it's an institution of the state, and the state should use the money that this institution creates. What I think it's useful is like the government has to lend the money out from the economy, and we do not provide a direct way to finance itself with the money created by this authority. I want this authority, or what I think it would be good, is this authority to be zero like a bank, not a bank for anybody, not for the banks, not for the government, not for anybody else. It would be just the minimum necessary thing. And the government has still a lot of tools to finance itself and to do whatever it considers to fix market failures or whatever. What is a very important thing for me is that we don't need this monetary authority to be a public bank or the bank of the government, or to lend to 0% interest to the government. We don't need especially that. The government can still manage to do most of what it wants by other means. And also, I don't think there is going to be political consensus to make this transition to a monetary authority if we impose that it has to be in serve of the government at all times. I know that some kind of independence is useful from the political cycles and so on. So despite the medium and long-term goals of the governments can be taken into account by this monetary authority, in the short run, it shouldn't serve the purposes of the political parties ruling at that moment, and it should consider first and most the inflation targets and the other key questions like the interest rate and so on. So that's something I think is very important to tell, and the solution is just to realize that the state still has a lot of tools to finance itself by taxes, by creating other kind of institutions, public banking if it wants, but it doesn't have to be the one that creates the money. This I think it's very useful to have this separation of powers very clear, because we know that governments can abuse the power. The next two things that I want to comment go along with this trend. I want a system that puts guarantees, gives guarantees to citizens that the government will not abuse this power, and that this power of creating the money of the state has some balances and allows it to try to be the best money as possible, private, well functioning, and so on. So if we implement digital cash, there is another thing that can go very wrong, which is to try to finish or end physical cash. It's naive to think that we don't need physical cash, and moreover, physical cash is like a guarantee that of privacy and accessibility. Many people don't want to use digital cash, and we have to respect that. And also, anonymity is, I think, a good thing to have. So if we have physical cash around, the digital cash cannot be cannot be private, not private. You have to, if you want people to use the digital money, you have to make it more private because they have the other alternative, the physical alternative. So it's very important that we preserve physical cash, we defend it, and we don't give the impression that way that we are imposing a tool that we are already seeing that it can be used against the people and creating more centralization of power on the governments, which could be a bad thing. We have to have the balances of power all around society. So the solution would be to still keep the digital cash, to not make it this a war between digital and physical, but complement each other, which is very important. And the last thing I want to consider here in this presentation is like the tendency of trying to, if we have this state currency that is so good, why would we want or allow any other kind of currencies around if we already have the best currency? Because let's say it clearly, the state is kind of the biggest actor in the economies, so it has the most secure asset. The currency that the government creates and accepts for taxes has a lot of security behind it. And this is something other currencies won't have. They will be riskier to failure all the time. But despite being this currency by naturally a very good currency, I think, we still need to allow anybody else in the economy to create their own money as they want, because it's a freedom that we want to preserve, because it creates again these balances. If the state abuses its power, people can still use another things and don't be controlled by it, or vice versa. Right now we have a private kind of currency, the bank money, which is not functioning well, and the state can provide a safer alternative and so on. So I think it's very important that we consider, this will be the solution, that we consider that it's a good thing to have a diverse monetary system, and we allow for cryptocurrencies and for social currencies and for every kind of experiment with money. Dev money, if you want it. If people accept it, people want to use it, and people are aware of the risk, just with normal regulation for consumer protection and so on, like in every other sector, would be enough. And one last thing, people may be worried about instability again, because if we allow private parties to create money and this money becomes very widely used, we cannot afford it to let it go down in case of a crisis, a monetary crisis. So we could have a way to avoid this instability, which would be that if a currency becomes too big to fail, we can impose it, that it backs most or part of, I think most or 100% of its creation by safe money from the state. In a practical sense, we eliminate the capacity of creating new money if they don't get real money behind it. So it's a way to stop private actors to keep creating not risk-free money, or risky money, when they become too big. And that would be my considerations around this issue. I hope, like with this, you get an idea of where are the main critical points in this kind of process. And for me, just to close, creating a digital cash has a lot of benefits, and it can mean kind of a change of the system, on the rules of the game in the financial markets and so on. So it's a big thing that we have to consider and to implement to solve many of the biggest problems that we face today. But there is a lot of risk, a lot of problems that can come with this transition, and we as a society have to be very aware of these important things, and keep watching if they are not, or they are taken into account. Nothing else. Thank you a lot for your attention, and see you in another video. Have a nice day.